Welcome to PolyCast, a civilization podcast focused on game strategy.
Dan Q.
Makalua.
The Me and Team.
Mad Jin.
With guest co-host
Josh 127.
Welcome to the PolyCast Hate Show. Please leave all email or thank you.
All hate mail goes to Dan Q.
PolyCast episode 251, Hate Mail. Whoa.
Yeah,
That's a good way to start it.
Some of it.
Welcome, everybody, to PolyCast episode 251. I'm some strange guy that was picked up off the street, otherwise known as Josh 127, and I'm here with Dan Q. Oh, hi. Mad Jin.
Oh.
Makalua.
Drink double the coffee.
And the Me and Team.
Professionals have standards.
Hashtag worst guest ever.
You have to keep working at that, Josh, though, because it's going to be a while. Yeah. To be the worst guest ever, I think that's a tall order.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll try my best.
Would it be considered trolling if I retweeted that we're fixing issues with articles by Rock, Paper, Shotgun, and Kotaku?
I think I'm a bad person to ask for advice on what constitutes trolling.
I'm doing it anyways. And the worst guess ever, Josh 127. He said it himself before I tweeted it, so it's not really my fault.
It's true.
So, gobbledygook, because somebody has refused to put the G in there, asks, anti-air, period. Would you rather use triplanes and fighters or anti-air guns and mobile SAMs?
Yes.
Well, that's the first answer is depends on several factors.
Yes.
Am I on the offense or defense? Do I have a tech lead? How much of one? And then further on, other questions are you right next to your cities and their cities, or are you too far away for fighters to be based, even by carrier, especially if it's on a Pangea map, etc., etc. So lots of qualifiers got tossed around on this thread, which made it a whole 2 pages. So
You do need some qualifiers in order to make a choice in a strategy game if the design is decent, so that is a good thing. But yeah, it would be pretty difficult to do fighters without oil, for example, yes.
Well, no, we can throw up triplanes, I think, to go to them, right? Something. But it's the range factor, right?
Yeah.
Triplanes and fighters only have a certain range. Can't leave your city without it. And, well, anti-air guns can slow march all over the place.
Yeah.
Of course, it's slow marching, not as fast as fighters bouncing from city to city, providing air cover.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, it also depends what you're using to take cities in the first place, which of these you might prefer.
Yep. Because
if you're using these, you're probably using these to take the cities in terms of the anti-air. They're basically your infantry in some ways.
Yeah, that popped up pretty quick
in
the thread. Anti-aircraft guns having 65 combat strength versus the infantry of 70.
Yeah. C4 had like infantry getting a bonus against other gunpowder and melee units, but not so much this game. So you can definitely just spam these if you want to.
Well, I mean, the problem is that they're slow, right?
Yeah.
I guess if you're using like a huge amount of tanks, because you went the silly direction, or you went artillery and slow marching anyways, then yeah, a bunch of anti-aircraft guns are good, except fighters get double the interceptions of anti-aircraft guns.
Yeah.
And of course, all comes down to how many fighters does your enemy have? If they've got a bunch, then they can just air sweep their way through. Of course, I think on that one we're actually talking about another player because the AI is never smart enough to air sweep first.
And the AI is not going to concentrate that much firepower with any consistent effectiveness anyway.
Yeah. So,
they're not going to bust through like 10 interceptions to hit you. It's just not going to happen.
No, they'll just send 10 bombers and see how many got lost along the way. Comparing Mobile Sam, 65 combat strength. Mobile Sam has 65, not AA. With infantry of 70, and Mobile Sam's atomic era comrades, tanks at 70, Marines at 65, paratroopers at 65. Yeah, it's basically an infantry unit with a little less, or, Marine or paratrooper based with massive percent versus aircraft. It's not a unit, especially even with the AA units at 50 compared to Foreign Legion of 42, Great War Infantry of 50. They're actually directly even at that point with Great War Infantry. It's not that they're a unit that you go, okay, this has to follow my army to keep it alive, but the chances of it being in a battle and surviving is little, which is probably more what would happen in real life historically, because it's not like they come with an entire battalion of infantry.
Yeah.
It's not set up to be that support unit that you want around, but not also just run over everything anyways. So that's a wee bit of an issue.
Maybe a little bit. You could maybe take their combat strength down somewhat, but because of the way the game's laid out, at the 1 unit per hex and distance between cities, sometimes you just have 3 hexes between cities, especially if we're talking AI here. I think it's reasonable to make them much stronger relative to regular infantry than they would be in reality, just because you can only put so many units on the board.
Well, I mean, that's less of an issue. And considering that the percent versus air units is actually a multiplier of the base combat strength.
Yeah.
Start messing with the base combat strength, and you have to mess with the percent increase and yada, yada, yada. Yeah, basically, are you within air coverage range of your fighters? If yes, you're probably going to use fighters, except are you trying to use Great War bombers or bombers, in which case you probably won't be using fighters. Or you might have like 1 or 2, because there's a cap on how many air units you can have in a city, and that kind of really defines how many that you're going to use.
Yeah, your cap is 6 unless you put an airport in there, and then you got 10.
Yeah.
But the fact that your air units have greater range, but also the fact that, hey, I can pick up and move this air unit to this next city, far greater than, I'll just put the anti-air on the road. Yeah, well, it's still going to have to move. Probably still going to be able to advance your airplanes faster still. And it's kind of one of those, okay, so yeah, there's anti-air, they can intercept. But at a certain point, you've got sufficient numbers of air. But once you get to bombers, and I'm thinking more about bombers of actually using the city to bombard as opposed to taking out units, although I tend to do that at times as well, it's more about taking the city and then having some melee unit on the map, often not a tank, because I would like to free my oil for the bombers, especially before we get to stealth bombers, which require aluminum as opposed to oil. But really, anti-air, if I get it gifted to me by a city-state, then I'll use it. If I don't, then it's generally a unit that I avoid, not because they're bad, but just that because more often than not, what it is that I'm trying to do, especially being on the offense, it's just better to go with the air.
I feel like you tend to pick those up if you're trying to push an artillery offensive beyond its era a little bit. So, like, you have tons and tons of well-promoted artillery, and you want to keep using it because you're just trying to end the game. One of your enemies has air or something. Like, I feel like that's one you might consider.
More. Yeah. Also, the benefits of fighters is that they can air sweep and anti-air can't, which means that for offensive bombing, you still need fighters to air sweep out theirs. Otherwise, your bombers are just going to get wrecked.
Or you could just pick up nukes and double nuke the target city.
Yep.
In which case, whatever was in there doesn't really matter much.
Other things that got brought up in the thread, anti-aircraft guns and mobile artillery obviously are very awesome for use of medic and medic 2 near cities with fighters and bombers. So even if you're going mass fighter and bombers, you still want to toss down a unit. It doesn't have to be an AA or mobile SAM unit, but a unit with medic and medic 2, especially after your air units got air repair, just to heal them up more. Pure defense-wise, I think AA is probably better than fighters, with the exception of the fact that fighters can double intercept and air sweep, because, well, you can move them around the map, and, frankly, more bombers. But I don't think there's going to be a situation where you're going to be using fighters, bombers, and tanks, as a lot of them, per se. You might have one tank and a bunch of bombers, unless you've got a crazy amount of oil, or ideology doubling up your oil. You sort of have to make a choice at some point, which is kind of why the AA and mobile SAM is useful, because they don't require it.
But now, from what you're saying, you're not going to go with a lot of fighters. If you're going with fighters, you want a couple of fighters there, just defensive sweeps, and then go with your ground units, your AA and stuff. Yes?
Yeah, sort of.
I didn't hear an argument for lots of fighters. I heard some which one's better, but it seems like they kind of have different roles.
Well, I guess you can load up, like, say you and your opponent are equal tech and you both have air, and Your opponent's going fighters, bombers, and you overcome that by just spamming fighters on their face, I guess. But it doesn't happen a lot in practice.
Yeah, because, bombers are just better.
Right, that's my experience as well, but...
Well, yeah, but say you can each field 20 air units, right? And so you just pick 20 fighters, and your opponent picks, 12 fighters and 8 bombers. Well, you're probably going to come out ahead on that.
Well, because the enemy is not going to be smart enough to air sweep constantly.
They're going to get intercepted by fighters, and there's still going to be fighters left over because you have more fighters.
Yeah.
But then I don't have my bombers. Come on.
Well, yeah, but the point is that they can't do anything with their bombers, and you shoot their bombers down if they try to use them, and you still have the option to use your fighters if you have a bigger number of air units in the region.
Yeah.
They aren't as good as bombers, but they can still hurt.
Yep. That's the other side to that is what's the trade-off for each one? Because if we're giving up oil, then we're giving up bombers, we're giving up city space. A pretty big trade-off if I can just build some anti-air and put them wherever I need them.
Yeah, it does sort of depends if this is versus AI or multiplayer. I think in a multiplayer game, you're probably going to want more fighters.
Absolutely.
You might have to trim back on your bomber spam because the human player that you're fighting against isn't going to be dumb enough not to put up interception.
You're going to have to think more about offensive units other than bombers because you need the space for fighters because it's great. Hey, I took this city on this front. Oh, wait, they just took 2 other cities because I wasn't paying attention.
One big thing people did bring up is that triplanes still have such a short range and they don't really have much of a intercept bonus.
Awful.
When it comes to air units, it's like, okay, I've reached flight. This is good. So I'm waiting until I can actually get fighters and bombers to do much of anything. It tends being, and again, back in the single-player perspective, which, it's good to mention the multiplayer thing, of course, but of course for a lot of Civ players, we're talking the single-player here and the AI's, what is a nice word I could use? Tendencies? Yeah, there we go. AI tendencies. That's nice. Essentially, it's like, okay, there's a time where I'm using artillery, and I'm using artillery, of course, ideally to bombard the city when I get that promotion for increased strength against cities. But then once I get bombers around, I'm thinking, okay, I'll keep the artillery I have, but I'm going to use bombers to, in fact, be bombing the cities. And if there happens to be some units around in order to be able to get to the city, some unit spam, as it were, on some hexes around cities, then I just use melee units in order to squash them at that point.
I am reminded of the Civ 4 blimps when I think of triplanes. Although arguably the Civ 4 blimps are more useful because of the amount of map you could reveal with their scouting mission was enormous. And they could, for some reason, detect submarines. Like, what?
Although arguably Great War bombers, which you also get at the same time as triplanes, way more powerful in-game than they ever were in history.
Yes.
I think it's sort of a problem of the early air units being a little too useful in general, and then later ones being really useful.
I think bombers are perfectly realistic in terms of the damage you can potentially do with them in the game. Now, are they good for balance? That's another line of thinking entirely. I don't know. Late game, as soon as you introduce nukes in the late game and bombers in the late game and that kind of stuff, you're basically looking for stuff that ends the game anyway. You don't want a stalemate in the end game if you want it to be resolved one way or another.
That's why you have XCOM.
Yeah.
Basically, I think what our generalized answer is a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, hey, guess what? Anybody want to delete buildings? No. We have a topic started by Kin. He wants to know when and what to sell off. Can I sell the market after getting the bank and others? And I'm thinking particularly on the market bank, losing the bonus you're getting from the market in the first place, so why did you want to sell it?
Maybe this user thought that one replaced the other one entirely, rather than...
okay. Yeah.
I think he was just giving an example and didn't think the example he gave through. Well, I don't think there's anything deep to selling markets in particular, because I can't imagine a scenario where you'd want to do it if you already have the thing. Don't you also get weird building destructions? Like sometimes you keep more advanced ones and destroy the lower tier ones when you capture a city? I don't remember exactly how that works.
Yeah, because it's like at random rolls for each of them or something. So you can destroy the library but keep the university. Okay.
Tom brought up a point. You can't delete buildings that cost no maintenance. I don't know why, but whatever. Doesn't make any sense. But otherwise, when you're raising a city, yes, selling buildings is useful because you can make money off it, of course. But if it's using a specialist, you can't sell it. If it's not using the specialist, you can.
Yeah, I mean, if it's late enough in the game that you're really not concerned about your science progression anymore, it's like late, especially in some games that are really long, it's like, oh, I'm out to future tech now. Okay, well, the first thing I do is like, okay, I don't need my science specialists anymore. I often don't actually sell the buildings, although I could. I guess at that point it's just, okay, I'm making so much right now. It's kind of like it's going to make my turn a little longer. Okay, it's going to improve my income, but then I look at the number of cities I have and the number of science buildings, and it's like, well, not really certain it's going to make much of a difference right now. I think the only time that I don't sell buildings, and I kind of wish I did, raising the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are improvements in there that you could sell. Short of that, why? Why would we do this?
I know.
Yeah,
If-
it's like to
if-
raise decisions or sell decisions where your outcome of the game is still in question or the decision still matters. So, yeah, like selling off late game buildings, fine. But which buildings and what circumstances would you sell off a building in the early to mid game, for example?
Not a
And-
lot, unless you were on a small continent. It was just you and one AI, and you'd already taken them over, and you knew you weren't going to build military units for a while. You could sell off the barracks.
But why?
Yeah, it
Unless
goes
you're
back
never
to
going to
but why.
build military again. I don't.
Yeah, I know.
Even then, it doesn't cost that much, and you should be generating more gold easily than
Yeah.
1 gold per turn. Really isn't a factor if you're at that point.
I think in most cases, if you're willing to build it, generally shouldn't be looking to sell it off.
later.
So it's more a question of conquest stuff. Like you take a city, what do you keep here?
Yeah, or maybe when you're Austrian, you're merging cities. Maybe
Yeah.
you don't want them to have all the buildings that they built. You want to specialize a little more or something.
Well, it's still taking a city, although it's a little bit less
Oh, yeah.
warmongery.
Yeah, it's the diplomatic version.
Yeah, I mean, Chum did try and make an argument. If you're trying to get the National Intelligence Agency for the extra fly, build all your constabularies, build your police stations, build the National Intelligence Agency, and then sell the other stuff. Or sell the other stuff as you go.
Yeah, that one
There's no reason
possible.
he says no reason to pay maintenance for something that's never going to be used because no one is going to steal from your 8-pop expansion.
Yeah, your capital, yes, but everywhere else, not really.
Yeah, that's a good point, I guess.
Yep.
Sure.
Multiplayer is different, but in single player, definitely not.
But it says, furthermore, I find those buildings counterproductive to my game plan, which is to let people steal from me so I can level up my spies. So, basically, his plan is
There
to
you
get
go.
the extra spy, but still want to use those spies to kill people that are spying on him. So, that's kind of a questionable thing, but I mean, realistically, if you build it, you should be able to pay for it anyway. So, if you find out later that you have to use it again for some reason, there's no point in ever deleting it because you spent that time building it. So if you think that there's going to be a situation where you're not going to need it, don't build it in the first place.
Yeah, you can usually find something that you're sure would be useful long term in your build queue.
Yeah, we did have one of the guys in the thread, Wild Wushta, but he was saying in science games that he takes freedom, he sells every building he can each turn closer to victory to get the last bits of gold needed to buy all the spaceship parts in one turn. It's one way to blast off.
I guess. And yeah, I mean, if you're an multiplayer, you can try and sell off all your buildings if you think you're going to lose the city for sure. But
Well, he does
you
also
should
say
probably
sometimes
try to avoid that outcome. But yeah, I guess deny your opponent as much of the benefit of conquering it as possible.
Tom says it's hard to time it all right, and sometimes he's a few under short. And I'm selling research labs and factories and schools, and I don't think you'd want to be selling those even at that point. But
Generally, no, you don't want to do it.
Strategies I will never do in Civ 5, and by I mean the opening poster or other posters in the thread. This one is started by Denaphanus. That's my best guess at pronouncing it. I apologize if it's wrong, but that's my best guess. Does anybody else have an aversion to certain strategies to the point that they never do them as a point of honor, is his question. He goes on to say a few things he won't do, like trade away a city he knows he's about to lose in a war, build a terrible city to trade to the AI, and then he will then burn it for no benefits, trade away Luxes for lump gold or other immediate things and pillage the resource, or nuke people about to win a science victory or destroy spaceship parts in transit. Oh man. I'm thinking of the quote-unquote honor brigade of Dark Souls here.
nuke people that are close to a spaceship victory sounds like a good tactic to me.
Yeah. There's part of the reason that they make these parts have to go in transit is so that they are risked in transit, and destroying them in transit is therefore part of the game's design explicitly. However, you can make a case that some of these others aren't. My feeling on this matter, although I mostly ignore it in the thread and just talk about other stuff, any line you draw here is necessarily arbitrary unless you are literally finding a way to violate the game rules, like using cheat engines and crap. I think that's pretty far outside the bounds of gameplay. But then you have this other stuff where you might choose to use it or not based on your own desired level of challenge or something, or you might agree to avoid them as a part of a custom rule set because you think the game plays better. But in general, if you're not doing that kind of stuff, your cutoffs are arbitrary. I'm just going to say.
Although, wasn't number 3 fixed a while ago?
You can still build a fort on the resource and pillage it.
Oh, yeah, but it's not. Well, you can build a fort on it.
Well, it's not pillaging it, but essentially you can break a lump sum deal by building a fort on the thing you're trading away.
Yeah.
So it was
different.
somewhat patched out.
But not
and
entirely.
I understand the line of thinking, okay, obviously the developers didn't intend for this because they actively attempted to remove it. Okay, fine.
And I think that's also been impacted a fair bit about not happening because in order to be able to do that lump sum gold, you do need to be friends with that person in order to get that, as opposed to just gold per turn.
Yeah, if Shock is ticked off at you, he's not going to go for that.
Even by default, AI won't go for that. You need a declaration of friendship. So you have to do some legwork to be able to use it at this stage. That was a good change for the game.
Yeah, build a terrible city to trade away to the AI who then burns it and gets no benefit. That's more just badly coded AI. It shouldn't have wanted to buy it in the first place if it's...
Yeah.
Although, notably, you are taking a penalty in doing that. If you do not, because your tech is going to cost more. Unless you are going to eventually build another city somewhere else that will leave you at the same number as previously, the fact that you went up to another city is going to make your tax cost more. And I believe your social policies as well.
Yes, and your social policies as well. And I know this person says, oh, well, you get lots of goodies for the cost of 2 turns building a settler. Well, maybe I could have gotten more goodies by building another unit, or actually taking that settler and, I don't know, settling it somewhere that would be useful.
Well, it depends on what you can get. You know, AIs do favor cost of cities a lot more than some other stuff. So maybe you could toss a crappy city that they'll buy anyways for something that'll make them happier with you, or stuff that you absolutely need.
Keep in mind, though, the scope of this thread is things that you won't do as a point of honor. If you're not doing it because it's bad gameplay, then, well, don't do it. But that's not a point of honor.
So second poster in the thread has the number 5 here. Bribe Civ A with all your luxuries and gold per turn to declare war on Civ B, then declare war on Civ A, which you were going to do anyway on the same turn to put them in a 2-front war.
Yeah.
I don't know, that sounds like good strategy in some situations. I mean, I know it's a point of honor thing, but...
It goes back to the crummy AI. So are you going to limit yourself for extra challenge, or are you going to do it, basically? From an honor standpoint, I think that's a junk line of thinking because the AI sucks. The AI sucks at war, so you could make the exact same case about fighting the AI at war as you could about this. And AI sucks at teching, so if you're beating it at space race, well, then you're taking advantage of a poor AI. I mean, come on. You have to draw the line somewhere, but it's arbitrary. If you want to improve the AI, by all means, improve the AI. Or if you want to limit yourself on certain things for a challenge, go ahead. But as a point of honor, no, it's not credible.
Yeah, well, I just think that should not be allowed to happen. But then again, the AI shouldn't really...
A player shouldn't do it. If somebody bribes you to declare on somebody else in multiplayer, and then they declare on you, you done goofed.
Yeah. Obviously.
So I don't think this is a game problem beyond the AI's ability to handle it. This is pretty much an AI failing.
Rather than honor, I would limit myself more on what I feel is fun. Tactics end up being, I can get away with doing something that takes me 5 minutes to set up, and well, in those 5 minutes, I could have gotten a lot more fun out of the game than I could have out of spending time trying to ruin an AI that I was already going to beat anyway.
We're talking about tactics here. They're very specific, very situational, and it's also a question, again, of are you going to be at an advantage of doing this over something else, because it's always opportunity cost. Then there's also the fun factor as well, and I mean, you can do it, and if you see that somebody is doing it, are you going to cry foul on them? Like, you should not have done that because of a matter of honor, or you're exploiting something that you are aware of in terms of a failing of the AI in order to understand the mechanics. Or is it just, hey, you shouldn't have done that, you're being an ass?
Depends.
It really does depend, and the multiplayer aspect was kind of touched upon there as well. I think a lot of this stuff you can get into more meta, And when I say meta, I mean that in the context of I don't need to work within the mechanics of the game to recognize that what you did was a jerk. In other words, my response to you doesn't necessarily have to be because of what I saw you do in the game in terms of what the mechanics allowed. But I saw what you did. You connected this point and that point, and you did that. And I think that comes up in 5 as well, because if you go ahead and do that to an AI, the AI is going to be mad at you, but are they really going to be any more mad at you than if you had just declared on them otherwise?
Although, again, it's popped up, Vobo in the chat and even stuff that we were talking about for the bribing one civ to dow another civ and then dow them. I mean, just slapping on a global antitrust unfulfilled deals or whatever for the rest of the AIs in the game would just automatically prevent you from doing that more than once in a game.
Then the game would recognize through the mechanics, so of course getting the AI here, that, hey, no, I am more angry at you for declaring on me, not just because you declared on me, but because you're being a dick.
Yeah, you did this deal with me to declare war on somebody else, and then you declared war on me to get all that stuff back. So basically you got something for free. So all the other AIs in the game should look at it and go, don't make trade deals with that guy. Why? Because the human player will break it, almost instantly even. So therefore, no trust in trade deals.
And you could be in a situation where you can say, well, I don't care. I got what I wanted out of that particular deal. Mm-hmm. And then that's fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do this knowing that the AI is not going to penalize me more than anything else. Not saying don't do it, because I still probably would do it. But then if someone calls you out on it, don't be like, oh, but why are you so mad at me? Like, fine, that's not something you're going to do, but it is something that I'm going to do. And if you really don't like the person who does that in a particular game, then either don't pay attention to them, don't play multiplayer with them, just try to do that to them first.
You're making a decision that has consequences. It's not just you're blocked from doing it. You're getting a nice decision where, yes, I can do this. If anything else comes up, then I'm going to pay the price for it.
Or you can make the AI be meta and just have a little meta thing going on in the background between games where it's like, how many times did that human break the trade deals? Yeah, you know what? Next game, screw him. Until they burn off the human hate. That would just be amusing every once in a while.
Yeah, the AI knows your weaknesses.
On turn 73 in our game on March...
And it should have a message in there, too. By the way, this is why.
Civilization V, the Kotaku Re-Review by Luke Plunkett. Here we got a nice article. I enjoyed this article, actually, where we're going back in 2016. We're looking at Civ 5 and saying, where is it today? Where has it been? They looked at a lot of different things in here. A couple of things really stuck out to me, and everybody's probably going to say that I'm all wrong, but that's fine. That would be normal.
Stop trying to push this hashtag worst guest ever.
I am really working on it, man.
We will decide.
The more I work on it, the more I win it, because you're getting sick of it, so there we go. I'm winning.
Giant quotes around that, but continue.
Yes. So they did a lot of comparisons to other games from 2010. If you look at them and you look at Civ 5 and you say, how do they stack up? They really don't. Well, in a lot of ways they don't. I shouldn't say they don't, because there's other good games from 2010, I'm sure. I don't know what year every game came out, but I'm sure there's still some that are still good. But, I mean, Civ 5's really held up, and one of their comments in here on that, the first thing that hits you about Civ 5 is that the only way you'd know this game is so old, in quotes, if somebody reminded you. Its menus, with their Art Deco inspiration, are almost timeless. Its cinematic intro still looks slick, and its character portraits, well, we'll get to those later. One thing that I thought about it, and I put down Civ 5 for quite a while, and I picked it up again recently. I thought that was a cool comment, because it was one of the things that really hit me was, you know what, the graphics and stuff, they're still better for a 4X game than what I normally see today. Which is great, because while it was a pain on my processor back then, it runs on my computers today. So, and it runs better than a lot of the other ones. When I think about other games from 2010, yeah, most of them have dated themselves. Civ 5 I can still play, but I think that's kind of the genre. If you got a good game, then there's lots of replay value.
Yeah, but Civilization 5 in 2010 is not Civilization 5 in 2016.
Correct.
And he does acknowledge the 2 expansion packs. So right away, in terms of how things have held up, if this article even existed in 2016, if there hadn't been an expansion pack, let alone the patches for the expansions or even some of the patches before the first expansion, let alone the downloadable content, which will separate from the expansion packs, would we be talking about this article? Would we still be talking about Civilization 5 in 2016 if what came out in 2010 was Civ 5 the end? I would say no.
We would still not be playing it the way we are.
Yeah.
It was both the expansions changed things and added things, and is what's made it so playable still this many years later.
Second point in here that I thought was pretty good. They did a comparison to old Civ games, and they pointed out how Civilization 5 kind of changed things. So Civilization through Civilization 4, you're looking at a grid.
Okay, yes, it was a departure. It was a departure in terms of we went from squares to hexes. First four Civilization games, are, when viewed through the lens of history, very similar.
He means gameplay history. He's talking about how the core elements of it didn't really change a lot.
Exactly.
Sure, you added borders in and a few things, but you could sit somebody who had only played Civ 1 down at Civ 4, and they would still get most of it.
I would put 1 to 3 in that category.
Yeah, Civilization 4... religion, as a mechanic, as opposed to simply a technology online, that was substantial. Civilization 5 wasn't the first departure from the series, where I would lump Civilization 1 through 4 as very similar.
4 was the first ICS blocking in the series, easily.
So
There's never a downside to having an additional city prior to 4. It might not help you, but there is never a possibility of reducing your empire's effectiveness from having an additional city prior to Civ 4. And the way maintenance and your early game tech balance could be destroyed by that really altered the series dramatically. I mean, Civ 5 kept that as an element, but changed maintenance to happiness. But that function is not new to Civ 5. Its implementation is different in Civ 5, but 4 is the departure point for that as well.
Yeah, so then when he further says that Civilization 5, only one military unit could occupy Hex at a time, it was within the confines of this conservative series a revolution.
Yes, that was.
It was.
That definitely was.
Yeah, as opposed to since he's talking about the former dogpile version.
Yeah.
Yes, talk about carpet of doom now, not stack of doom. And regardless of what victory condition you are going for, maybe even more so if you're not going for domination, you will find yourself being visited by carpets of doom, or even in before previous Civ titles, stacks of doom, because you're playing it out on the map. That's where your cities are. That's where the units are. You move the units around. Territorial possession is key in order to be able to do anything from science being king, and food, and culture, and religion, etc., etc. Like the thematic, essentially, yes, I'm getting the theme, but some of the specifics he was getting to, I couldn't help but bring up as, not quite Luke, but I get where you're going with it.
Well, see, and some of those things, it's like, you know what, it makes sense, and I really like some of these things from a conceptual area, but I'm not sure if in the gameplay do I feel that they all make the game more fun for me. The next point that they were talking about was the non-military aspects and how they fit in, and how in earlier Civ games, it's always talked about, of course, it's the best out there, and do other games have it? Well, a lot of games don't have that type of aspect. They're all war games. But you've got culture long a hot mess, has in Civ 5 been refined into something genuinely useful. You can build more buildings that generate it, you get more units, which can spread it. Later archaeologists can improve your current culture by digging up the bones of your vanquished foes. It finally feels like a worthwhile way to try and win a game of Civ, something that can be specifically targeted and developed and used almost as its own bloodless weapon. Now, the non-combat ways, for me, most games they get in the way. There are more interesting ways to go about non-combat victory. But then the question is that what I want in Civ? And yeah, sometimes I like playing a game where, it's not my typical go and bash a bunch of heads, but a lot of times I just like to bash a bunch of heads. Let's face it. I want to be active.
Diablo's for.
It's do I want to be actively out doing stuff and making decisions to push ahead and push into the enemy, or do I want to sit back in my civilization and grow it there more? I really like to have a mix, but I do feel that there's a little bit more balance there of having more stuff to do, and might still be some question as to if that would be a way I'd ever want to pursue. And of course, in multiplayer, probably not.
Did you just want to meh at us?
No, I just want to kind of meh the article. Culture, yeah, it's gotten more refined as the series has gone on. A little bit better. And even within Civ 5, it got refined. It used to be sit in a corner and just take social policies, and then later it became, hey, I actually have to do stuff instead of hit end turn. It's no longer the hit end turn victory. So yay. And actually took other nations into effect, which is nice. But there was a few fallacies in this article. You guys talked about the first one being that it's not the same game as back in 2010.
Well, keep in mind when they're talking about the 2010 comparison, they're mainly talking about the art and all of that, the graphics, the menus, and things like that.
It is true. He does say that, and he does acknowledge that. But then at the same time, that's not the be-end all of the game. We're talking about a game. This is not a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I actually want to interact. I'm not just a passive participant. I'm an active participant.
That's the thing. It's like part of the weirdness with the article is he's talking about, 6 years later. Well, you know what? People are still playing Civ 4 6 years later. Yep. 10 years later.
People are still playing Civ 1.
That's the whole point of Civ. And that's how Civ itself, ignoring all the other 4X games that are out there, it's how Civ still remains the number one 4X game in existence. It has that long cycle. So it has the base game, then the couple expansions that improve all the stuff. But where he gets eventually at the end of the article, he starts talking about modding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes the game last so long, so that they can take 6 years between games, rather than build it and then somehow need to build a new one a couple of years later because you didn't do anything with it.
Yeah, that's why we don't have Civilization 2010.
Yeah.
Civilization 2011. Civilization 2012.
Yeah, exactly.
There's one thing this series could really use, and really turn-based strategy or 4X in general could really use, it's stable sound multiplayer. Other than StarCraft, I struggle to think of a strategy game that has decent, consistent connectivity between a large number of players without things tanking horribly. Even today in Civ 5, we can't play with more than 4 or 5 people in the game without having a strong suspicion that's almost always validated that we won't be able to finish the game because of connection issues.
But that's in the design of the core engine for Civ 5.
Yeah, it is, unfortunately. But it's the one thing that I think really holds the series as a whole back, because it was a problem for a long time in Civ 4 as well. And at the end, it wasn't perfect, but it was a lot more playable, only to be reintroduced as a serious issue that never got corrected again in Civ 5.
Yeah, because multiplayer is another one of those points where, at some point, beating the AI is easy, depending on your difficulty level that you choose. And you want to have a better challenge, so you therefore want to play against other people. The underlying network code and all that really does, in this day and age, need to be core to the whole thing so that it works at the beginning.
Yes, and stays working.
Yeah.
Josh already touched upon what Luke talked about, the 3 systems that have become Civ 5's legacy, which was culture, refined into something generally useful. And Magin kind of touched upon it where, between 2010 Civilization 5 and, let's say 2016 Civilization 5, because this article is being published in 2016, culture improved, but I don't think it was that culture was not useful until we got to Civilization 5. In fact, upon release, especially if you're talking about a culture victory, it was less useful.
Yeah.
The approach than, say, culture in Civilization 4. I definitely agree with about the ideology when he describes it as a masterstroke. Helped address the, so it's late game, things are decided, let's just hit end turn, I'm going to squish you, let's hit end turn, I'm going to be voted, head of the UN, end turn, I'm going to launch into space, I win science, end turn. But the part about religion, permeating the very fabric of a civilization remaining largely outside your direct control, as being a masterstroke in Civ 5, and if you're going to talk about it as a masterstroke, that would be in Civilization 4, because, it's an actual mechanic, tying back to my point of, it's not just a technology on a tech tree.
One thing I'll take nutrition on for religion is that it's not largely outside your direct control. It's actually entirely in your control. Unless you're sitting there letting it just wander around all by itself with pressure, at which point, fine, you're not doing anything with it. But the reality is the expansion of it, the creation of it, the making it better, the fighting over it, that's all your control. There's nothing outside the control. The bad thing about religion in Civ 5 is just a coding problem. Religions are tied to a specific founder Civ. Also, that means that if you founded a religion and you died, the religion technically is still in the game, but that's it. And it's even removed from the list of religions. Because if the Civ's gone, obviously you don't need to show off what the religion of that Civ was doing, even if other people are using it.
Founder bonuses really need to be tied to holy cities.
Yeah,
It should have been from the start. Although I think it is in its best place, even over Civ 4 religion. Civ 5 definitely added a lot more strategy.
I mean, he actually did get into things that didn't do well in Civ 5, like combat AI, and diplomatic AI.
Yeah.
So I find diplomacy in Civ 5 to be one of its biggest failings.
Yeah,
it's not diplomacy. It's a trade table. That's it.
It really regressed from Civ 4. There was a lot more planning and strategy to how you manipulated the AI and diplomacy in Civ 4 than there is in 5.
Also, empire management regressed as well.
Tall versus wide was probably the biggest individual mistake in the series from 4 to 5.
Well, no, just in period. Like, there was less actual things to do empire-wise.
Yeah.
And that's always a real frustrating point in a game is when you get to the newer version and especially the AI regressing in something that's supposed to be a strategy game, tactics game, anything of those sorts. If the AI regresses, for me, that's one of the bigger complaints I'll have about the game is I want the AI to improve each time, not take large steps back. Because if it takes large steps back, it feels like people cut their development time. It's like we wanted to get this to market faster, so we never got around to finishing it up.
I get what you're saying, but the move to 1 unit per hex basically doomed the AI. I think it became impossible to make the AI move or threaten you at the same degree of threat.
I'm thinking in terms of the diplomacy and such.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about things there that, hey, you settled towards me? Sorry, I hate you. Well, you know what? I'm still really far away from your city. Why did you care?
That aspect of the game really wasn't strong in Civ 4 either, though. I don't know how much it really regressed in that regard. I was thinking more along the lines of your planning aspect around the diplomacy that regressed, but the AI's play quality strength is pretty similar between the two in that regard. But there's no existential threat to the same degree that Civ 4 had just because the game's design changed.
Keeping in mind, I mean, that's one thing we have to separate out here. A lot of the stuff that this article talks about as good stuff, that's on the design side.
Mm-hmm.
And the stuff that he talks about, the not as good stuff, pretty much only on the AI side, which is not part of the design.
Although the AI's capabilities do depend on the design.
Well, it's more of getting the AI to be able to fully use the design as designed versus...
That's true, but that's part of the...
between the two.
That's true. Those interact, though, necessarily. And your choices for one could definitely influence the other.
Maybe in conclusion to this, Luke Pluckett's final sentence of this article on his review of Civilization 5, quote, "I loved it then, and I love it even more now," unquote. I wouldn't be that strong. I wanted to love it then, is how I would phrase it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I love it now.
My gosh, the state of vanilla in 2010. Fix the 4X genre.
This article is linked to from Luke Plunkett's article on Kotaku, where he says that yes, it helps that there hasn't been a Civilization 6 and that the 4X genre itself is sadly stagnant in order to try to explain why Civilization 5 is still as good as it is 6 years after its initial release.
4X genre has gone stagnant. Here's how to fix it is the title of the article. Yeah, so here's how to fix it. You make gameplay decisions that are variable depending on what you see in the game, and you have replay value. That's how you fix it. There you go. Oh, am I supposed to actually cover the article? Oh, well.
No, you know the funniest part about what you just said? Neither of those points are in the article.
Well, I'm aware of that because I read through the article, but...
I have a few things to disagree with what he said. One of his points was there's no story and you have to make up your own story. I'm sorry, there's an entire subforum of Civ fanatics for every single Civ game where people write stories.
Isn't that the whole point of 4X games? Is to make your own story.
Game. Yeah. Story in a 4X game, you're making your own story. And I'd love to argue, but in this case, I agree with Madge. And I read through this article and I'm just like, really?
I wonder if he lost his imagination on that one. You know, create stories in your mind. Because when he starts talking story, my only thought line is, you know, story-based games have zero replayability. Zero. You finish the story, you got it. You might play it once or twice again just for giggles, but it's dead after that. Why? Because you already got it all. Just to provide some context, the guy played Civ 2 when it came out, and then many years later he played some Civ 4 because he was nostalgic about it, and that was about it. From what I can tell from this, Civ 4 was his last time he enjoyed a 4X game. And he wonders where that joy is gone. My answer is you probably haven't actually played 4X game at all compared to, you know, one or two options. Is 4X stagnant? Let's take that off the thing first. 4X genre has grown stagnant. No, it hasn't. First off, There has been more than a dozen qualifiable 4X TBS games out of Iceberg Interactive, which is a small-time publisher of indie 4X games, in the last year and a half. So has it gone stagnant? No, because those 12 games all have different takes on things in the 4X genre. There's constantly new ideas getting thrown out there. It's not like they're trying to copy Civ specifically. And on top of that, then there's all the fantasy games that have come out in the 4X genre in the last while. There might only be a couple in there that are worth even mentioning, like Fallen Enchantress and Endless Legend, and then a bunch that should never be mentioned, like Beyond Earth, and some follow-ups to some of those games. But there's still a ton of those out there. And then there's all the space-based ones that are out there. I think there's actually a couple of things in there that might be nice, or at least on point.
Quote, the lack of purpose or vision is palpable in games like Beyond Earth, the 4X equivalent of a shrug, unquote. Oh, man.
I fully agree. I'll give him that one. But when you talk 4X, and the only thing you mention is Civ, and Civ 2 plus Civ 5 on that side alone, and then there's the general shot back to Alpha Centauri, and then you mention Mu, but literally zero mention of any fantasy 4X game while complaining about story and other RPG-ish type elements. I can't get past that.
Well, that wouldn't be convenient to his point.
Yeah, exactly. Mom? Remember Mom? Master of Magic found like an entire genre of fantasy 4X. You know what they had? Story. Seriously. That's what they brought to the table for 4X. Is that anywhere in the article? Nope. Not at all. In its conclusion, the end 4X genre needs to do more than get out of the shadow of civilization and Master of Orion. What about Mom? An entire genre in 4X.
If you're going to call it out like that, you have to address the attempts that were made. But they weren't.
Yeah, it says each new 4X needs to find a story to tell about conquest, survival, exploration, discovery, or all of the above. Guess what? The fantasy 4Xs always tend to merge in RPG elements, roguelike elements, story elements. There's an entire third of the genre that does the things that this guy is complaining about as a core part of why they're different than Civ or Space, other than just, fantasy units instead of historical units. There is actual differences in there.
Rob Zacny has been a guest on PolyCast in the past. He is also the lead co-host on 3 Moves Ahead, which is a podcast dedicated to strategy gaming coverage, which includes, but not limited to, turn-based strategy games like Civ, including the strategy games that, as Matt and Phil have already gotten to, are not addressed at all in this article. I would further quote from Zacny to try to get further at what he's getting at. Fundamentally, 4X games are stagnating because they are ultimately games about progress that have nothing whatsoever to say on the subject. Their version of progress is almost universally boring. Most 4X games tell the following story. A society gets more and more advanced tools and infrastructure to satisfy the same basic needs throughout its history. Its competitors go through a similar or identical progression so that relative gains remain fairly small. Meanwhile, the society itself changes hardly at all. Just come up with one sentence to try to summarize this as a byline. It would be this one. Quote, dull, rote progress undercuts every aspect of 4X games. Unquote. He goes on further to say that combat scarcely changes except the statistics on units and weapons get a little larger so that the war you fight at the dawn of history is almost exactly the same as the war you'll fight at the end. Once settlement is over and development is underway, it becomes all too easy to hit and turn a few hundred times until the score screen because there's little to admire or enjoy in the process of building. Friends and rivals become abstract collections of math to be manipulated with trade offers and military strength values rather than fellow actors on a heroic stage. You're all there competing to be a better civilization, but with no idea of what you're actually building towards. Unquote.
I'm sorry. There are goals. There are victory conditions even. If you don't know what you're trying to build towards, then you're not playing the game.
4X. Explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. And yes, of course, I had to say that as a dollar from Doctor Who because that's required. It's in my contract.
It is, totally. He holds up Alpha Centauri as fundamentally successful because it has flavorful text and cutscenes to create a complicated and ambiguous context around the theme of progress, despite the fact that its very traditional mechanics do little to support its narrative. He gets away with it because the narrative flavoring can make the humdrum building blocks 4X progress feel alternatively thought-provoking, chilling, or humorous. Fine.
I would rather have the gameplay first, personally.
Well, no. The thing is, in that respect,
I mean, it's nice to have those things, but
okay
the core of 4X gameplay and the meaningful choices to be had there and planning around your goals, that is the core gameplay. And some games do lose sight of their core gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, if you get the core gameplay, you do need to flesh it out on top of it.
Yeah.
To make it, well, obviously different than somebody else's 4X. That has the exact same mechanics. But story is what you make it in a 4X game. Yes, narrative flavorings and all the other stuff is actually important in a game. Otherwise, yes, it will get kind of dry and rote. Yes, you need all the mechanics. Yes, you need to make sure that all the stuff Phil said is correct in there. You actually do need some contextual flavor and stuff, but it doesn't need to control. It needs to be there to enhance. So that, yes, does need to exist, and that's why Alpha Centauri did pretty good.
After your first playthrough, how often are you watching the cutscenes? You're skipping them.
Or
if there's cutscenes in a game, a 4X game, and you're playing it more than once, you're skipping them. So the story mattered the first time. It was cool, and now I can move on.
Sometimes. Depends on the flavor. I mean, 4X games that do better flavor-wise are the ones that allow you alternate stuff for the same thing. Plus, does a 4X have a backstory? Because people use that to get into the narrating their own story within the game. How many times do we need to know that Gandhi nukes everybody without actually having Gandhi nuke somebody in game? And yet, Gandhi nukes everybody. There's a buildup of that around the game. And that's partly why Civ gets away with a lot of stuff, because you can't directly compare a historical game on its story and narrative because, well, it's all history. So if you start coming up with really silly things that never actually happened in history, but you're trying to force a story based on that, you kind of have to give up on historical accuracy there.
Why?
Yeah, you're telling a new story. You're telling your own stuff. I do love in his comment section how people started complaining. It's like, why did you put all these pictures of all these games in the article? And you didn't actually say which games they were, for one, which is bad. But then, two, you didn't say if there were good versions or bad versions, because he was trying to talk about both. But which ones were good? Which ones were bad? He just kind of threw them all up. He does actually have one interesting point in the whole article. He starts talking about Vicky 2, how as the game progresses, instead of just filling the same buckets over and over again, or it's always consistent through the game, that at certain points, what your focus is quite different. So it could be that for Civ, through ancient to medieval times, or even up to the industrial age, your main focus is lots of farms, lots of this, that, and the other, your basic stuff. But once you start cranking out factories, maybe you need to, back in the olden days, use electricity to get things rolling. And maybe that older stuff is no longer useful to your society. And you need to change how you're working. Yes, ideologies actually in Civ 5 picked this up a bit, but it's just one piece of the puzzle that actually did that. And even religion, where religion was more dominant earlier in the game, it became less dominant late in the game when ideologies took over. So there was, even in Civ 5, a bit of that, but those were secondary mechanics in the game. So the question comes down to, where could you make a 4X game be able to do such a flip, and how hard is that flip going to be, and how well you can control it, where it used to be combat's all melee based at this point. But then at this point, guess what? All range now. Period. Everybody's got a gun. Just like in history, things fundamentally changed how people did stuff. Yes, that would be interesting, and it could be possible.
Those kind of changes that come through the mechanics have an impact on the story that is your particular game. It is helping to shape what it is that you are doing and not doing, and when you're doing it and how you're doing it, and how other people react to you, whether it's another human player or an AI. Defiant Mars said in the chat, story can take place, but it needs to take place in the 4 axes, which is similar to a comment that I pulled from Shadow right from the Rock, Paper, Shotgun article itself, which is, the renovation of the genre will come through gameplay and mechanics. Story and fluff are nice, but ultimately are just embellishment. Of course, flavor adds to the experience, but it's a secondary trait. Someone else, actually, Hobbs, also brought in a whole other element of this, which is, this is going to come as a shock to a lot of people, including very smart people who are making very profitable games, but the games which stand on the shoulders of Civ and Master of Orion work. In other words, 4X might seem stale to the article writer, and they might apparently be in need of refreshment, but at least thus far, they're still very marketable, very profitable, and there's a very vibrant market with a good swath of competition and demand not only for the obvious candidates, for Axis' entirety in the Civ series, but for the less obvious ones as well, which several in the comments have already pointed out, and we've pointed out as well. The ones that catch lightning in a bottle, mentions Endless Legend and AI War, set precedents that, if nothing else, engender discussion and create new ways forward for larger 4X franchises to consider innovations with. And I would also tie to the previous article about Magin mentioned from the article from Luke Plunkett about Civ 5, the longevity of Civ owes very much to the work of modders. But that gets people thinking, just like when people write stories about their games and they add more detail, like they go kind of meta with the story, or they get some thinking about, well, what if this was in the game? And then that mod is introduced, and then the developers and the publishers pay attention, ought to anyway, and say, maybe there's a way that we can actually incorporate that in a subsequent version of the game so that things are not stagnating. Ms. Morkey on RPS says, I think the central argument here is that 4X games simply provide the same old Conquer the Stars world narrative, and that this lack of narrative interest leads to the same old mechanics over and over again is fair. You might have mechanics that have similar names or the same name or similar objectives, but they are not the same. And at times, they're not even similar. Because if I were just to say religion is mentioned in the original Civilization. Yes, it's a technology. Religion is also mentioned in Civilization 4 and Civilization 5. It's a heck of a lot more than just something that's mentioned in passing. It is a whole mechanic. Or, oh, I understand the mechanic of war in Civilization 4, therefore I understand the mechanic of war in Civilization 5. Actually, no. No, you do not.
Yeah. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's been going on the whole time. That's going on right now. So again, I go back to, it ain't stagnant. Because if it was stagnant, no one would be making the games anymore, except for Civ or mainline other stuff.
Rob, hey, I understand getting frustrated with a particular genre of game, and then you go and you play something else, and if you come back to it and you realize, oh, I don't get the same enjoyment that I was getting out of it anymore. Perhaps, I would argue, especially given everything else that's been said, has more to do with your perception of gaming and what you want from games. Yes, the games have changed over time, but so have you. At least in terms of strategy, look a little bit more at games that you did not talk about in your article, but I know have been covered on 3 Moves Ahead. So that's the kind of thing that really surprised me as well. Like, who was saying this? Again, it wasn't just those Rock, Paper, Shotgun. Not just that this person has been a guest on the show. Not just that it was referenced in this article about a re-review of Civilization 5, but that you're the head of a podcast specifically dedicated to strategy, and have been doing this for several years now. I don't get it. More than anything, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has to get out of the shadow of Civ. Sorry. Civ is Civ. No one's going to fight that. They could try, but they're not going to do it. In the historical 4X game, the sheer volume of 4X is coming out in the last number of years. It went from very low amount to massive spike. So is it that it's stagnant and everybody just wants to gravy train it, even though there is no gravy train unless you're Sid Meier's? No.
Support the ongoing PolyCast Patreon campaign.
Collective achievements.
Personal incentives.
Month-to-month commitment.
For more information, visit thepolycast.net/Patreon.
Call in today.
In North America, 301-637-7659.
In Europe, 44121-288-7659.
The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
Log on to the series' official website at
thepolycast.net.
This has been episode 251 of PolyCast. I'm still very hungry, Makalua. With me as usual, Dan Q.
Do you enjoy us talking over top of each other? Would you like us to do that some more?
No, I would not. Imagine.
I regret nothing.
The me and team.
My nation of whales wails on your skitty.
Things we didn't need to have visuals of. And our guest, Josh.
Hashtag worst guest ever.
At least it's not worst co-hosts ever.
Wow.
Hashtag mispronounced tagline.
Yep. Yeah. Worst test ever.
The bulbing great writers. You realize you can't do that, right? Oh, I meant great scientists. You knew that. And then someone said, did you mean to bulb great scientists and blot great writers? I like this. I'm going to use that now. I blotted my great writer. I blot you. Or maybe it's I blot myself. I don't know. This is a family-friendly show. Next topic. I had a great segue. Now I forgot what Phil said because Phil said it.
That's great. Great segue. Too bad. Speaking about integrating old topics.
Oh, man. Are we actually moving on here?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we are.
I thought we were just going to stay there for the rest of the show. Okay. So.
Now this is Josh's.
Hey, Phil.
Oh, okay. My bad.
Oh, we're skipping mine?
No, he was going to do yours.
Record date?
March 19th, 2016.
Civilization 4, 5, and Beyond Earth sound clips. Copyright Take-Two Interactive. Copyright Civilized Communication at civcom.net.